Hello everyone, a warm welcome and thank you for attending the session. Thank you Pakistan Dreamin coordinators for this wonderful opportunity you have given us. I am Sandhya Sambasivan. This session is on exploring Salesforce Composite Resources. Let me introduce myself. I am a Salesforce architect at UST. I am 6X certified application architect. I am also Kochi developer group co-lead and a Trailhead ranger. You can reach me in Twitter and LinkedIn. Let us see agenda for today. The first one is introduction on composite resources. Why composite resources? Different types of composite resources, limitations and considerations. Let us first see what is composite resources. We have seen standard Salesforce REST APIs which we use to create or update data in Salesforce from an external system. These APIs we do one at a time. So composite resources is an enhanced form of a REST API which executes a series of REST API calls in a single call. It also helps you to do multiple CRUD operations like read, create, update, delete, all these operations in a single call. You can use output of one request as input of a subsequent request. That's a big advantage compared to the single API call we used to do earlier. And also, response bodies and status are returned as a single response body. And composite resource, even though you're having series of REST API calls in a single call, all of these calls together is counted as a single API call towards your API limits. Also, composite resources are executed in the context of a same user. Now let us see why we should use composite resources. As we have seen in the previous slide, we can have multiple REST API calls in a single call. It also improves the performance. Processing speed can be made faster by collating the sub-request. Collation of sub-requests we will be seeing in the upcoming slides. Then, single call towards the API limit. The composite resources are synchronous processes. That means you send the composite request and you get the response synchronously. There is no additional coding required at Salesforce side. It is sub-request which matters. And it can handle more complicated related objects and data. Let us move on to the next slide. What are composite resources consisting of? First, it will have a URI which is having API version followed by composite word. So API version, the current one is 52.0 and then followed by the composite. For each of the different types of composite resource, the URL will vary. So we will see that also in the upcoming slides. Then format are JSON or XML and the method is HTTP. Authorization is bearer token. And most importantly, composite resource consists of its request body and response. Now let us see what are the different types of composite resources available. So the first one is composite, then batch, S object collection, S object tree and graphs. So each of this composite resource have different behaviors. So we will go into detail on each of these and see how it behaves. First one is composite. Composite API is having all the features of the composite resources what we saw earlier. So the first one being the series of REST API calls request in a single call, then output of one request as the input to a subsequent request. Response bodies and HTTP status of the request are returned in a single response body. It is counted as a single API call towards the API limit. Format is JSON and there is a sample URL which is given here. For composite API, it can have both post and get. So the sample would be having API version followed by composite. Now let us see how a composite request body and a response body will look like. Let's move on to the next slide. This is the composite request body. On the left hand side, you can see the format and on the right hand side, you can see the sample. Let's go to the format first. First one is the all or none parameter. This specifies what to do when an error occurs while processing a sub request. If the value is true, the entire composite request is rolled back. The next one is collate sub request. It controls whether the API collates the sub requests to bulkify them. So when the sub requests are collated, the processing speed is faster, but the order of execution is not guaranteed. This parameter we have already discussed as one of the advantage of composite resource, that the processing speed can be made faster. We saw that in the previous slide. Now after that, you can see that there are multiple composite sub requests. Each of this is a REST API call. On the right hand side is the sample. First is the all or none parameter given as true, followed by the composite request, which is having two different sub requests. First one is to create an account record, and second one is to create a contact record. Now that is the advantage of composite, that even though we are inserting two different records of two different objects, still it is considered as a single API call. Let's go through the details. On the first one is account creation, where the method is post and the URL is services/data/API version, followed by S-objects and account. Now there is something called reference ID. I'll come into that. Then followed by body. And the next one is creation of contact. Here also method is post, followed by URL, where we have the contact specified as the object, then reference ID and the body. So as you see here, both of these sub requests are having the reference ID. So the reference ID helps to identify the sub request in the request and response. We will be able to map which is the request and what is the response we have got corresponding to that particular sub request. So when I show you an example of the response, you will understand it better. Now, if you see, I'm in the next slide, I'm showing you the composite response body. So this reference ID will be returned in the response body as well. So one use case would be when an external system is inserting a lot of data, multiple data into Salesforce, and some of the records have failed, some succeeded. So using this reference ID, we will be able to identify what are the data which got created inside Salesforce and which are all failed. Let's move on to the next slide. This is the composite response body. On the left hand side is a format where you can see that there are multiple composite sub requests. On the right hand side is a sample response. This is the same sample of the request we saw earlier, where we were creating an account record and contact record. Okay, so this is how the response will look like. So the first one, let's go through this in detail. First body, you can see that ID of the account got returned in the response. Success is true, and if there was any error, if there was any fallout, then error would have been listed here instead of the ID. That time ID will not be there because record never got created. Then next is the HTTP header. Status code is 201 and reference ID. This is the reference ID which we discussed earlier in the previous slide, that we'll be getting back in the response. Using this, we'll be able to map which is the record which got created or failed. Next is the contact. So in contact, you can see that the ID got returned. Success is true, no errors. HTTP header is given. Status is 201 and reference ID is ref contact. The same thing what we had given in the request. Now I will show you a demo of Composite API, how it works. So as part of that, I have already logged into my Salesforce environment. And also, I'll be showing the example using Postman now. So let's see how it works using Postman. I have already logged into the Salesforce environment. And in Salesforce, I have already created a record type called service account in account object. Coming to Postman, I have already authorized my Salesforce environment in Postman. Coming to the body, there are 3 sub requests in this particular example. First one is a get, then a post, and after that there is again a post. The first one is to get the record type ID from S-object account, where developer name is service account. So using this reference ID of the first get method, I'll be able to access the record type ID and use it in the subsequent request. Let us see how it is used. So we'll go to the next post, which is creation of an account. You can see that name is Southern Containers, type is prospect, and at line number 16 is the record type ID, which is referencing the reference ID of the previous get method. So when we create the account, it will be related to this particular record type ID. Now coming to the next post, which is the creation of contact. So I'm trying to create a contact which is related to the previous account, the Southern Containers which I have created. So for that, along with the other details, I'm already giving the account ID. You can see the reference ID is the reference ID of the previously created account. So this is how we can create the related records in Salesforce. So all of these count as a single API call towards the API limits. Now let us see whether the record works. I'm clicking on send. I got the response below. You can see the composite response here. The first one is to get the record type ID. You can see the record type ID. I have received the record type ID. Next one is the creation of account. So this is the response for account creation, where I have got the ID of account which got created. And then you can see the reference ID is also returned in the response. The third one is the creation of contact record, where I got the contact ID in return. Let's go to Salesforce and see whether the record got created. So I am moving to the Salesforce environment. I'm refreshing the screen. You can see that an account record got created. It is having the type as prospect, and this is created with record type as service account. You can see that a related contact also got created here. If I open this record, you can see that account name is Southern Containers. So this is how Composite API works. Now let's go back to the slide. Next one is the batch. It can have up to 25 sub-requests in a single request. Each sub-request count against the rate limits, and sub-requests are independent. So previously we saw the example of Composite API. There I mentioned that even though we are inserting records of different objects like account and contact, all of it is counted as a single API call towards the API limits. But in case of batch, it is different. Each of the sub-requests counted against the rate limit. Moreover, we cannot connect or relate between two different sub-requests. So for Composite API, we were able to give output of one request as input of another one. In case of batch, we cannot do that. And for batch, it is always executed in the serial order. And formats are JSON or XML, and the URL will be having API version followed by composite followed by batch. Now let us see the example using Postman. This is the composite batch. I have already given the headers. Moving on to the body. You can see the URL that batch is appended at the end after composite. Here there are two sub requests. The first one is a patch. You can see the URL here. I have given an ID. This means I'm going to update the account which we created earlier. This is the ID of that account which we created earlier. And I'm going to update the name of this from Southern Containers to new name Southern Containers. Next is a get method, where I'm querying that particular ID of account to get the name and type fields. So let's see how it works. I'm clicking on send. I got the response here. So this is the first result. Here status code is 204 and result is null. And for the second one, you can see the status code is given as 200, where I'm getting the name and type of the account. You can see the name is appended to new name. And the type is prospect. Let us see how this looks like in Salesforce. I'm going to the account. You can see that account got updated with the new name. You can see the account got updated with the name. So this is how the batch works. Let's go on to the slide. Next is the S-object collection. So it can execute actions on multiple records in one request. One request can handle only one object and can insert up to 200 records. That means if you are inserting 200 records, you can insert only account record. You cannot insert a mix of account or contact like that. You cannot have multiple objects operations in a single S-object collection call. Then objects are created in the order they are listed. The list can contain objects of different types, including custom objects. Possible methods are get, delete, patch, and post. And the URL will have the API version followed by composite followed by S object. Now let us see the demo using Postman. For S object collection, you can see the post method URL is having S objects at the end. This is the body. Here it is given under records. So this will be a list of records in which this is the first request where we are trying to create an account record with name as a subject collection and billing city as San Francisco. The next one is to create a contact record with last name and first name. Here it's the type which specifies which is the object we are trying to create. So let's see. I'm clicking on send here. This is the response. So here you can see that there is nothing called reference ID. So S-object collection will not give reference ID in the response. And this works only for insert. You can see the ID is returned for both and success is true. Now let me open Salesforce. I'm clicking on account. You can see that one account got created called S-object collection. Yeah, this is the record with billing address as San Francisco. I had not related the account and contact, so you cannot see the relation here. So this is the contact which got created separately. Both account and contact are independent. You can see this is the contact which got created. Let's see the next composite type. This is the S-object tree. So it can have collection of nested parent-child relations with a single root record. A subject trees with root record should be of specific type. So this means that it is like a tree. We can have the sub request like a tree format where you have a root. So for instance, you are trying to insert account record and the related contact records and some child records which are related to the contact like that. You can have up to 5-level deep relationships and the root here is the account record. You can insert up to a total of 200 such related tree records. Then the list can contain objects of different types, including the custom objects. Get, delete, patch, and post are the possible methods, and the URL will be API version followed by composite followed by tree. Now this tree is also very helpful to insert multiple objects which are related. And one thing I have noted is that using a subject tree, you can only insert records. You cannot update records. Let's see the demo now. For a subject tree, the URL will have composite followed by tree followed by the root object. So for our example, it is account. In this, you can see that it is mention of attributes. Okay, so for each sub request, you have to mention what is the type. See here, first we are inserting an account and we are inserting two related contacts. So first one is account where name, billing city are mentioned. If you see this in detail, you'll understand that I have not mentioned any relationships between contact and account. In S object tree, as I mentioned, this is like a tree. So this account is mentioned inside the bigger loop of account. Okay, this entire JSON request is coming under account. Inside account, it is the contacts, and there are two records of contact. First one is tree contact 1, second is tree contact 2. Let us see how it works. I got the response. Yeah, I got the reference ID also in return, and a subject tree supports only insert. So the ID of the related account and the two contacts also got returned in the response. Let us see in Salesforce now. Refreshing the screen. A subject tree got created. I'm going to the detail. Your billing city is coming as San Francisco. A subject tree is the account name. I should have two contacts created here. Yeah, tree account 1 and tree account 2 got created. So this is how a subject tree works. Let's go back to the slide now. The last composite type we are going to see is the composite graph, which is my favorite. It was released in 2021 and it provides an enhanced way to perform composite requests. It can assemble a more complicated and complete series of related objects and records. Order and parameter is always true for a graph. We have seen that the composite APIs we have seen till now can handle up to 200 records, but composite graphs can handle up to 500 records in a single call. And delete, get, patch, and post are the posable methods. URL will be API version followed by composite followed by graph. So since composite graph can handle more complicated type of data, I want to have a deep dive into composite graphs to see how it can actually help us with the APIs. So let's go into a bit more detailed for composite graphs. I'm moving on to the next slide. So composite graph, you can see that this is a picture representation. Here for graph, the composite sub-requests are known as nodes. You can see that there is a parent node and two different child nodes. On this slide, we'll see the graph sample request. You can see the request here, which contains two different graphs. First one is the graph 1. Second one is the graph 2. Let us go into detail of graph 1. So graph 1 has two different sub requests. First one is a get method. So account ID is given at the end of the URL. So that means it is getting the account details in this particular request. And you will be able to use this reference ID of ref account 1 in the second sub request. Second sub request is to create a opportunity. You can see the method is post. So we are creating an opportunity with the name as amazing opportunity, and you can see that the ref account 1 dot name is mentioned here. So the name of account which we previously had the get method for, that will be inserted here for opportunity, stage name, close date, and you can see that account ID is here. The reference account 1 dot ID. And the URL here is specified as a subject slash opportunity, and reference ID is new opportunity 1. And going to the next graph 2, which is also having the similar functionality of getting another account ID. You can see the account ID is different for the second graph. And using the second account ID, we are creating the opportunity relating to the previous account. So this is how flexible graph is. Now let us move on. So here I have given a sample representation of composite graph. How complex we can have this composite graphs. So first is account. Under account we can have account 2, which is again having a related contact, and on contact there is a related contact 2. There is another contact 3 which is related to contact 2. Then there is campaign which is related to opportunity, and account 2 is also related to the opportunity. Also there is campaign member and lead. So this kind of complex relationships, multiple relationships, we will be able to manipulate using the composite graph as a single API call. That is the advantage. Even though there are multiple CRUD operations we are doing, these are all considered as a single API call. Let us move on to the next slide. This is another example. You can see that there is graph account 1, which is having graph contact 1 as a child, graph opportunity as another child, and graph account 2. So you can see that account 1 is a parent and account 2 is a child, which is again having an opportunity and contact related to it. Now let us move on to the demo of composite graph. For showing this demo, I'm using the same relationship we saw in the previous slide, where we are creating related account, contact, and opportunity. And there is another account which gets created, which is related to the previously created account, then related contact and opportunity of the second account. On the URL, you can see that graph is appended at the end. Till now, we have seen the update of record using Salesforce record ID. So that is possible only if an external system is aware of the Salesforce record ID. So what if the ID is not available? Then we can make use of an external ID. So I'm just covering that also in this example. For that, I have created a field, a custom field called customer external ID. The data type is text. You can see that unique is checked and external ID is checked. So this will be the identifier for an external system to upsert data into Salesforce. Let us go back to Postman. If you look at the first account creation, you can see that it is a patch. Patch means it's an upsert operation. URL mentions the account / custom external ID and 123. Here it means that account get created using the external ID 123. Since it's an upsert, if a record does not exist with 123 as this field value, then it will get created. If it already exists, it gets updated. And moving on to the rest of the request body. Next is a post, creation of contact. Here account ID is given as a previously created one. So rest of this body does not have the external ID. Only the first one I'm giving as a patch. Rest everything is a post. Then next is a creation of related opportunity. Here also the previously created account is given. Next is the creation of account. This is the second account, which is a child of the previous account. So you can see that at line number 40, this is how you establish the relationship between the records in the API. Parent ID is already an existing field in Salesforce, the standard field, which is available in account object. Okay, so I'm using that field, and inside that, instead of specifying the Salesforce ID of the previous parent account, I'm giving the customer external ID. So using this external ID, it will relate the parent record to the account record. After that, it is followed by the creation of the related contact and opportunity. Let's see how it works. I'm clicking on send now. Yeah, I got the response. This is the account, first account which got created where we are using the external ID. You can see that there is another parameter here which is the created equal to true. This denotes that the record got created. Okay, and this is the ID of the account. Next is the contact, related contact. Then comes the opportunity. This is the opportunity record. And after that is the creation of the second account, then followed by contact and opportunity. Now let's just see how it will look like in Salesforce. I'm refreshing my screen. You can see that two accounts got created, graph account 1 and graph account 2. I'm opening the first one. This is the graph account 1. See the name as graph account now. You can see that customer external ID field got populated with 1, 2, 3. This is the related contact and opportunity of the first account. Moving on to the second account. This is the graph account 2. You can see the parent account field populated with the previously created graph. You can relate any relationships. You can relate any records using this way. This is contact and opportunity which got created. Let's move back to Postman. I want to show you the update functionality also. Now I just created using, so I'm not referring to rest of the composite body. I'm just referring to the first one. Okay, I will delete the rest of the body here. Yeah, so here to show the example of update, how it works. You can see the name is given as graph account 1. So I'm going to append graph account 1 with test. External ID is still 1, 2, 3. I have changed the name from graph account 1 to graph account 1 test. Clicking on send. This is the response body. You can see that created is false. Earlier it was true because the record was not existing. Now it is false. I'm going to Salesforce to see whether the record got changed. I am refreshing the screen. See, the name got changed to graph account 1, where the external ID of this particular record is already 1, 2, 3. This is how Upsert works with batch. Now I want to show you an example of fallout also. For that, I will add one field which is not existing in Salesforce. Test this field. I do not have such a field in Salesforce environment. Testing error. Okay, let's see how it looks like. I'm clicking on send. See the error here? Message says no such column. Test this field on a subject of type account. So if they were related composite requests in the same body, which we started with, so there were contact and opportunity also on that particular request. We just truncated to show how update works. So if that was the case, then every other sub request which are following this first one would have rolled back. It will say transaction will be rolled back because of this error. So that is how graph works. Now let us go back to the slide. On this slide, I have listed the limitations and considerations you should be aware of while using the composite resources. So these are based on my experience with the composite resources. Let's go through each one of it. Not all the composite resource support create and update. For example, a subject tree supports only create and not update. For majority of the scenarios, you will be able to understand the error from the error message, but there were a few cases. For example, the error message was the resource not found. If you see this error message, you will not understand what is causing the error. So it took me a few trial and error to find out what was the issue. Reference ID will not be there in the response for batch and subject collection. In the demos, you saw that how useful the reference ID is, but this will not be there in the response for batch and the subject collection. Same reference ID cannot be used in the same transaction. It will hit duplicate reference ID issue. Same external ID record of the same object cannot be used in the same transaction. Composite resources, the API calls are counted against the inbound API call limits. So this is counted for a 24-hour period, the inbound API call. So composite API calls are counted against that one. Also, there is another limit called concurrent API limit. If there are API requests which are running more than 20 seconds, it is a long running API request. You cannot have more than 25 long running API requests parallelly. Then you will hit the concurrent API limit. So you have to be careful while using the composite resources that this API limit is also considered. One example I can give us that if you're using this composite graph and you're loading data into an object which is having a lot of automations in Salesforce, then there is a chance that you hit this error if you're loading this data, lots of data together in a parallel fashion. So you have to be careful on the automations which are existing in Salesforce. So whichever are not required for this data load, this data manipulations from API call, then you can bypass those automations accordingly as per your requirements. So considering all these, you should be able to choose which is the composite type which will fit your requirement. So that is very important. Based on the requirements only, we'll be able to identify which is the correct one we have to use. Each one is having different behaviors. Now, let us move on. With that, we are nearing the end of the session. So these are the two resources I have referenced for preparing this session. So the first one is the Salesforce resource, which has very much details on different composites, and it also have example. You can try it out using Postman like I showed the demos, or even you can use the workbench to try it out. Next one is regarding the error codes. So on this example we saw different error codes. So this link is having more details on the what error codes you can expect. So using seeing the error codes also, you will be able to understand what is causing the error. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you may have on the session. You can reach me in Twitter and LinkedIn. I have given both the IDs here. So with that, we are winding up the session. Thank you all for attending the session. I hope you got some good insights on using composite resources from this. I'm so grateful to Park Dreamin to host my session. You guys are doing an amazing job organizing and coordinating this. Thank you all. Have a great day ahead with more sessions from wonderful speakers. Thank you.